Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Mahlon.
We're here again for another episode. How are you doing today?
It is a lazy, hot summer Sunday, and I'm loving it. We're going to be grilling out tonight, playing games as a family. So I'm kind of just enjoying the relaxing day. How about you?
It's back to normal at my place, so that's good. After traveling and a crazy week of training at my work, it's good to have my Sunday back to normal. So
something to said about being the normalcies of life, right? Our schedules are routines. They're comforting.
Yes, especially after a hectic couple weeks. So it's good.
But I do want to say how fun it was to have you here in person for a weekend, and boy, did we live it up. I have not been able to go out to eat or look at my bank account for the last week. So, had a good time.
Every time somebody asks me how was your visit, I always I was like, I can sum it up in one picture, and it's a picture of my daughter with her half order of nachos that probably weighed 10 pounds. So.
Literally, it was served to her on a serving tray. It was massive.
Like a pizza. It looked like a pizza tray. That was nuts. That was nuts. So
it was a good time though. So I'm glad you came and visited. So thank you for that.
Yes, again, and less than 17 years from now, it'll happen again. So
I hope so. Okay, so Jamie, hopping in for food for thought. I have one today that I'd like to share, and it kind of came from me. I know you joke around with me that I get inspiration from brushing my teeth. I'm happy to report that this time it wasn't from brushing my teeth. It was actually from mowing the lawn. So
I'm comforted that it didn't come from the bathroom. So that's good. That's good.
I was listening to a new podcast that I'm enjoying. It's called Beyond the Paradigm with Paul Breckel. And I was listening to an episode on there that had to do with COVID. And again, I'm not going to get into, the controversy of that. I'm just kind of highlighting the fact that in part of that episode, Paul highlighted the fact that media, it's very seldom that we have live news coverage anymore, that most of it's edited. And he was talking about media manipulation and just manipulation of the facts that's currently in our society. And as I'm struggling underneath one of my trees and I'm mowing, I'm thinking to myself, oh, that's, so horrible that people, use manipulation to get what they want. And I literally stopped in my tracks and I thought to myself, I use manipulation. And then I started looking at every aspect of my life, work, professional, and it's hard for me to find any place where there's not a form of manipulation in my conversations with friends, peers, colleagues, children. And it just kind of made me stop in my tracks to start thinking of these things in a new light. So my question is, how often do you use manipulation in your everyday life? And do you recognize that it's manipulation?
It's a really interesting question. And I'm glad we didn't go down the rabbit hole of fake newsery or something like that. But as I think about that, I struggle to even, I don't know, that's not my intention. So, I mean, I can think of times where my kids are like, oh, you're just trying to guilt me into doing something or something like that, which has always kind of frustrated me because that's not my intent. But so I don't know. Do you have an example? Because I'm kind of floundering here a bit with that one.
I do, and I have one I think that's going to help both of us. Because, Again, I'm always sitting here going, Even underneath the tree while I was mowing, I was like, no, I don't use manipulation. Oh, I don't. Well, I use that as a manipulation, but that's to keep the kids safe, or that's to get things out of people that I normally couldn't because I'm trying to help them. And I'm masking the fact that I'm using manipulation for good. But the fact of the matter is, it's still manipulation. So here's one that I have. We've talked off the mic before, and you've shared, what you do for a living, and I've shared what I've done for a living. But we use forms of manipulation even in our job. For me, I have to manipulate a presentation that I'm about to give because there's certain information I need from individuals that if I didn't manipulate the document in a certain way or change the way I was going to talk to them about a subject, I wouldn't get the information as freely as I needed it. So I manipulate documentations, I manipulate my conversations, I manipulate my approach to get information out of them. I would say the same thing even in your career. There's things that you have shared with me that you've done professionally to help people come to where they need to be, to support them. You're shaping the landscape, for the lack of a better term. And to me, they're all helpful stuff. And it's not hurtful manipulation, but this podcast, when Paul was talking about that, made me go, I do use a form of manipulation in my speech, my documentation, my presentation. And sometimes it's something as silly as when you have to get your friend to come over to your house for a surprise birthday party, or you get your wife to go somewhere for a surprise baby shower. Again, those are lighthearted. Those are fun things that are going to be the outcome. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I use manipulation a lot. And the one that I honed in on, Jamie, was I use manipulation a lot with raising kids. There's a lot of things that I've done in the past with kids, keep them safe. As they're aging, manipulation is something that I still use even with my 17-year-old daughter. And again, it's not meant to control, it's not meant to be negative, but there's still some sort of form of manipulation. And it was really eye-opening for me as I'm sitting here. Again, I'm stopped now at this point underneath this tree, thinking of all these things that are coming to me about the forms of manipulation that I use in my everyday life. And it just left me kind of dumbfounded. And the next thing that I went through was, well, there's bad manipulation and there's good manipulation. But the fact of the matter is, like I said before, it's still there. And that was shocking. That was surprising to me.
What's interesting about this is the word manipulation has an automatic negative connotation to it for me. And so, like, when you say that, even when you're like, Jamie, you do this in work, and I'm like, like the heckles are up, and I'm ready to be like, dude, do you want to roll, right?
Put the knife down, Jamie. Put the knife down.
Exactly. But I'm tempted. I'm not going to lie. I'm actually reaching for, you probably hear the rustling of my stuff here. I'm going to reach for my phone and I'm going to do a good Google search. And let's look at just the definition of the word manipulation. Cause I'm wondering if that's not.
And even whatever you find as the definition, I agree with you. When I hear the word manipulation, there's a negative connotation to it. And what's interesting to me is I think it can be used for good. And that's so weird to say because, again, it's been ingrained with me that it's a negative thing. But I've used it to keep my kids safe. I've used it to kind of help spur on conversation. I've used it to get someone to see, my point of view because it was hard for them to see it because maybe it was a new concept that they were trying to grapple with. And so I wouldn't say that was negative. That was not a negative use of manipulation, but it still was a form of it, which as I'm even sitting here talking to you, my brain is literally splitting in two as I think about that because forever I've always associated the word manipulation with a negative feeling, a negative connotation.
Well, and if you do a Google search and ask Google what it means, what does manipulation mean? The Google tells us the action of manipulating something in a skillful manner, or number 2, the action of manipulating someone in a clever or unscrupulous way. So even unscrupulous, it's like, oh, maybe that's not Language is so important. That was actually a huge piece of the training that I did this week was, the value and importance of language, and to really, to understand what words mean amongst the people that you're working with or the people that you're living with or whatever, to really understand what that means to that person means that you can then shape how those interactions go, or manipulate how those interactions go. You know what I mean?
Again, my whole body just was like, you can't manipulate people. And it's
exactly.
But at the same time, it is what, and I'm going to make it about me now that I kind of gave you an example to get your wheels turning. That's exactly what I do. And from a professional point of view, there's a lot of times that I have to do that in order to even get the conversation started. Now, once it gets started, then I kind of back off and just let it happen. But definitely to get going, there are things that I do. And in my profession started out as being a business analyst. And being a business analyst, some of that training that you get is around how do you present the information? How do you boil it down so somebody can understand it? Use a lot of visuals, shape the visuals so it's easier for someone to see where you're going and to start the conversation. And the biggest form of manipulation is put some data in there so they can react to it. So it's a lot easier when somebody sees a spreadsheet filled in that they can say, oh, you got that one wrong. It needs to be this. Or, oh, I don't like that one. Can you remove it? Or, I'm glad you added that one. I never thought of it. And now that I'm thinking there, could you add X, Y, and Z? Versus coming to the table with just a blank sheet of paper and say, okay, let's talk about what you want. It's all a form of manipulation to get an outcome that's desirable. And I'm telling you, I'm standing by myself just cringing because of the word manipulation is just ingrained. And so as the more I finally came from underneath the tree and I continued mowing, the more I thought about all the situations in my life where I do use a form of manipulation. In writing, in my speech, casual conversations. I mean, it's all just kind of woven in there. And it makes me kind of hesitant because I don't intend it to be negative. But then my next question is it negative? Is my version of what I'm using manipulation for, I'm using air quotes, good, but that's through my lens. What happens if, somebody else judges that? And would they also agree that I'm using it for good? So it just starts opening up a whole other vat of questions at that point.
Well, and so for me, then that just lays the personal responsibility on myself to say, okay, am I manipulating this for my own outcome, or am I manipulating this to support someone else to see things in a different way or to approach things in a different way? And I think that's a huge piece of really even with our kids, it might be quote unquote manipulation, but is the desired outcome going to benefit myself, or is it going to benefit them? And that's, I think that's up to each and every one of us to make sure that we're meeting things in that way so that we can keep moving forward as people. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And the reason I'm chuckling is I'm thinking of all these times that I've interacted with, my parents, my kids, my wife, friends, and the intent, I think, is the only saving grace. If my intentions are to not hurt someone or, deceive people, I think that's where I can lay my head on my pillow. But I tell you, it is a big perspective shift for me just to even be able to recognize that it is a form of manipulation. And in some parts of my job, I'm really good at using manipulation to help people come to a conclusion that I need them to get to that otherwise I don't know if they would have in the time allotted. And that's part of my job. And so it just took me back, because as I am, again, listening to this podcast, speaking down to, oh, I can't believe, the media uses manipulation and blah, blah, blah. And then I realized I'm no better because I use manipulation in almost my everyday life. And the intention of that is what's probably going to save me from, I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to deceive. But wow, what a mind shift to even understand how much manipulation that I use. And that was eye-opening. So I just wanted to share that and see if maybe you could relate in some way, or if you're like, absolutely not, I disagree. But I just wanted to kind of lay that open and discuss it.
I'm not going to lie, when you gave me the headline, I was thinking, no, I'm going to disagree with that. But the takeaway for me is it's definitely though, like with those relationships that I'm close to, if they tell me, I think you're just laying a guilt trip or you're just trying to manipulate this, I think that it's good for me to consider whether that's a thing and to really stop and look at my own motives and make sure that my motive isn't to do that in a negative way or to benefit myself, if that makes sense. So, and really just stop looking at that word as such a negative, such a negative thing. Cause, it's funny because there's been a few words like that recently that I'm like, oh, I always thought that had such a negative connotation to it. And I think societally, we probably have put a pretty negative spin on that word, but I still will likely read that with a little bit of negativity if someone else says it, because I do think that that's part of how language shifts and changes over time. But what an interesting thing to think about. Thank you, man.
As I'm mowing my lawn, I tell you, lightning strikes.
It's good. It's good. You should mow underneath that juniper tree more often. So I don't know how well this transitions into the topic, except I did do a little bit of reading about something. So today we want to talk a little bit about that concept of when someone who might be considered an enemy. It's not my favorite word on the planet because I tend to be a little more strength-based than that. But when an enemy becomes an ally, or when an enemy becomes a friend, and we just want to talk a little bit about that today. So, Mahlon, do you have a shining example of when an enemy became an ally?
Oh, I do. I've been wanting to talk about this for the last couple episodes, so I'm glad we're finally kind of unpacking it. And like what you were just saying, I was thinking to myself, does food for thought, does that segment today kind of fall into what I'm doing or, what we're going to be talking about? Before this conversation, I probably would have been like, no, there was no manipulation. Now, I have to tell you, in the example that I'm going to give you, it was littered with manipulation. And it was littered with manipulation not only from my side, but this individual side. And probably a little bit from my manager side. So, yes, I think it's going to fit nicely into that. But my example, and it's probably one of the best ones that I've had, and something that's very current as of a few years back. But I was part of a team where a gentleman and I were working in the same department on the same team, not the same project. We were like oil and water. I saw the world through a lens of grays, blacks, whites, grays. He saw the world as black and white, and he had a structured way of what he did, and I had more of a fluid approach where let's see where the conversation takes us, let's see where we need to go, all with the end goal in mind, but how we get there might be a little bit different than just let's do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then we'll be at the end. I do want to take a minute and say, personally, didn't really know the gentleman. Have a feeling that if we would have got to know each other on a personal level, we probably would have liked each other. But from a professional lens, did not care for one another. To the point where our leader had to get involved from you both are outstanding resources, and imagine what you could do if you combined your energies together rather than picking each other apart for not doing it the way that you do it, which was hard to hear from time to time. Accurate, but still hard to hear. So there was a time when we had a big project hit our team, and this individual and myself were put on it. We were co-product owners, co-BAs on the project. And we had to learn how to trust one another and how to learn how to work side by side one another. And let the other one take a lead from time to time and trust that the work's going to get done, even though it's not the same way that we would do it ourselves. And it was a time of huge amount of frustration for me, not only because there were times I was thinking this person is a roadblock and a stumbling block and I could do things faster, but just because there was that constant struggle. There was a point, though, in our conversations and our collaboration together were I pulled a meeting together. And in that meeting, I shut the door and it was just him and I. And I said, let's have it out. And I said, there's nothing, no one's here. No one's going to hear us. Let's have it out because we've got to learn how to work together. He had the same kind of idea, which later on, as we worked more and more together, I found out that probably one of the main reasons why neither one of us liked each other was because we were a lot alike in our profession. We just ultimately had different approaches, and that's what was causing the drift. But we hashed it out. We talked through it. And from that point on, we agreed, let's put bygones be bygones and let's work together. And when we did combine our energies, we really transformed that project. It was behind. We caught it up. Not only did we catch it up, but it was ahead of schedule. We had all of our documentation. We had the team working at full capacity. There was very little that was missed. Really, not a lot of rework from the development team, which again, in IT, that's a huge win because that anytime you have to redo something, that's more money. And so it really showed me, and it was one of the most clear times when I would say, to fit into this conversation, when an enemy or somebody who is, I'm going to use the word enemy, we had to learn how to work together. We had to learn how to become allies, how to trust one another. It was very difficult and it was very stretching, but at the end of the day, it was very, very rewarding, and it taught me a lot of lessons.
That's a really good example. Is there any ongoing work with this frenemy? Is that a thing? Is that part of the process for you?
Yeah, and we were a lot after the project, and I no longer work for that company, so no, I don't have daily interactions with this individual like I did. But I would say after we worked together and after that project, we were, I was still in the department with him for probably a good year. And I will say the temperature between us was a lot more pleasant. I still think we wouldn't have said we're each other's favorite person, but there was a respect that we've kind of built between each other that suddenly when I would go to him for a question, before it was just conflict. And after we worked together, there was some genuine, okay, let me hear you out. What's your question? And I really appreciated that. And I also grew to appreciate his approach. Although it drove me nuts, there was the structure around it and the thought process that went into it was really useful. And there was pieces that I was able to break off from that. And I still use some of that stuff today, even in my own work. And I would hope that he would be able to say the same thing, is that he got to learn to see the world in a little bit, gray area. But I can definitely tell you there was an increased amount of respect between each other. And from that, even though we disagreed, and even though we probably still, our approaches were different from one another, I can tell from that point on, once we got done collaborating, there was a genuine, I'm going to help you, and a layer of trust and a layer of respect that wasn't there before. And I think that was really important to have. And it was really kind of cool to see that relationship go through those different stages and come out the other end where it did.
That's really cool. This one is a little tough for me. And I think I told you that when we were kind of talking about this being our conversation. I can't think of, I think of people that I didn't get along with or people, but I don't know. I can't think of an enemy. I hate that word. I think that's what it is, but.
Well, and I don't think this person wanted me dead by any means. It was like oil and water. So I think maybe a better, although the name enemy to an ally is really catchy and kind of, flashy. It's
attention grabbing.
It's just really about, have you had to work with someone that your styles just didn't match? You had struggle. It was something that you were like pulling teeth, and then you guys found a way to kind of just gel. Personally, I've had relationships like that. I've written people off just because of something that I thought I knew of the individual, and then I was thrown into a situation at church where we had to work side by side, and I start understanding this person is nowhere near what I thought they were. They're not the monster I was making them out to be. And then that always makes me feel so small and and stupid that I would judge people like that. And then when I start getting to know them, I'm like, well, they're not anything like I thought they were. And, I think those are moments too of kind of what we're talking about is, at least for me, that's in my mindset. These are the changes and these are the situations that I'm going through that says, wow, I would label this person as, an enemy or someone that doesn't care for me or something, that we're just too different. We can't get along. And what great partnerships can come from that, and the learnings that could be there. And how many times did I close myself off to that, professionally and personally, and all those lost moments, I just kick myself, because now I go back, and even when I was a young person coming into, the field that the IT field, and going through college, and all of the experiences that I just shut the door on because I just labeled people, and I'm like, we're not going to get along. We're not going to see eye to eye. And it just makes me sad. I just mourn those. And so to me, all of that kind of fits into this theme that we're talking about.
No, I really appreciate that perspective. Actually, that makes sense. And I think that fits better with the example that I can think of. So I haven't always worked in the same place that I've worked. I've done this type of work for a while. And I was working with a family, and doing human services, when you're in it with families in like some of their most difficult, challenging times, it's easy to get a little attached, and to really invest and care for that family. And so I was working with a family, and I remember one time I went to my visit with them, and there was another professional there. And I instantly found myself, I was a lot younger then too, but I instantly found myself like, okay, but you don't care like I care. Like, these are my people. I really want to help this, like there was some sense of rivalry or something. And then if you fast forward like a month and a half later, I'm working with this person. I didn't even realize when I like had applied for the job that it was the same agency that this person worked at. And so it's funny because after I started there, and after we started to get to know one another, and started becoming friends, that we realized that we both had that kind of first impression, like, who do you think you are? I'm the one that has invested in this family, like, this ownership idea that, that we own the market on caring for someone or something, which is funny. And then you fast forward, like literally she became my work wife. She was my very best friend at work, and, was probably one of my biggest supports in the workplace. And then you fast forward a few years, and something happened, something shifted. And there was a really big divide that happened. We both had switched positions, and things were just different. And we weren't sitting next to each other anymore, and we weren't like leaning on each other in that same way anymore. And then she ended up leaving the agency, and I stayed. And I don't think we talked to each other for 2 years because it just had become really untenable. Well, one day we ended up on the same meeting, and I got a random text message, and it was her. And it's funny because it was like after not being in that same space, positions changing and the relationship really having to shift, by having that space and being able to come back together in a whole different way, we've been able to build a whole different relationship. Like we have a friendship. We haven't, her agency can support my agency, and my agency can support her agency. And it's been a cool thing to stop and reflect on, that, what could have been lost forever is able to come back together, and we can still support one another. But it's taken but it needed a space, you know what I mean? It just needed a little bit of perspective and a little bit of shift in understanding. And so, not exactly sure how that happened, which is kind of why I did a little bit of reading. And this is how it kind of ties in for me, to our food for thought. Have you ever heard of the Ben Franklin effect?
No, I haven't.
So apparently Ben Franklin was kind of a jack of all trades, like legislator, scientist, early psychologist, early astrologist.
Well, and if you talk to my history professor in college, he was also the biggest man whore you'll ever meet. That's how he introduced. Yeah, that's how he introduced Benjamin Franklin in our history classes. You'll never meet a bigger man whore than Benjamin Franklin. So
wow.
Thanks for that.
Well, it's all about the Benjamins, I guess. I don't know. But it's interesting because he wrote a book. I guess he wrote a book. I've never read the book. I'm sure the language would probably be a bit of a struggle for most of us. But he wrote a book talking about this concept, this idea of how does an enemy become an ally? How do you take an adversary and turn them into an ally? And one of the things that he talked about was really like, he did this purposefully. Apparently there was like another legislator that was kind of on the rise, and he knew this was going to be an effective person in government. He knew that this was going to be a partnership that he really wanted to make, but they weren't in that space at all. And so he said that asking for a favor does more than doing a favor, right? So in his book, he talks about like getting to know the person and doing some research and learning about them, and then asking a small favor. And the reason this is called the Benjamin Franklin effect is because apparently there's some psychological value in this, that our brains have to justify why we have done a favor for someone that we don't care for. Like, we have to make them a good person in our mind because it all has to even out.
So food for thought segment folding in here for me is thinking that is dripping with manipulation.
Exactly.
And not only are you manipulating the other person, but you're also manipulating yourself into having to think a different way. That's like an issue within an issue, the question wrapped in an enigma. That's mind-bending stuff.
Well, if you take it into like the practical and not intentional way that this typically happens, okay? Like, I mean, if you were really intentional about it, that does feel super manipulative, right? Like, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Your brain's going to tell you that I'm a good guy. And then I'm going to ask you for the big one, right? Like, that's stripping and manipulation. But if you think about how this works and how this plays out in like a normal, typical interaction or relationship, it could simply be reaching out and asking for help, or even just doing a kindness for another person. Because if I do a kindness to you and you think that I don't like you, your brain has to reconcile that too. Like, well, why would this person do something nice for me if they didn't care for me? Right? So just that simple act of doing something in service to another person can really start shifting the way we view one another. And that was kind of, so yes, it crosses over for me because this feels really drippy and manipulation, but at the same time, how often does that just naturally happen? And that's what it looked like for me in this relationship that I shared is, you know, it wasn't like, okay, I need this girl on my side. I need to, you know, we need to be allies. It was more like, hey, I brought candy to the office. Would you like one? Or, you know, that kind of thing that just starts building that positive interaction, that positive rapport with the people around you.
Do you know, I'm literally having an epiphany. Do you know what that sounds like it touches on?
Huh, tell me.
Have you ever heard of the term servant leadership?
Yeah, I feel like I have. I don't know that I could tell you about it.
So servant leadership refers to, and I'm reading a definition here. So servant leadership refers to the type of leader that dedicates themselves to serving their team. So they don't do the work of the team, but they make sure that the team has everything that they need in order to be successful. So that could be as removing obstacles for the team, helping assist the team in something that they need. It's a variety of different things. But when I hear you talking, but even, again, food for thought segment, that's even a form of manipulation. I'm going to help you so you can do your job. So basically, I'm making sure that everything is smooth for you because we need you to perform a certain level, and this is how we're going to do it. But even that, did you call it the Benjamin Franklin effect?
Benjamin Franklin effect.
That even has a layer of servant leadership that in my everyday life at work, we have different roles on our team. The Scrum Master role is supposed to be a servant leader to the team, and that's their entire job is to make sure that the team is moving forward and removing obstacles. And some of the things that you even were talking and reading about the Benjamin Franklin effect, I could see traces of that into what that person's role is every single day. And I'm seeing a thread of manipulation through all of it. And it's all so interesting how these things are falling into place, and how we're kind of recognizing that theme, even in our conversation.
Well, and I think most important for me as we're talking about that is just how that word, I really have to scrub that word a little bit of the negativity involved around that, because anytime I want to make a personal change, any personal growth that I want to make kind of starts with some self-manipulation. You know what I mean? Like, I have to sorry, you guys aren't on the Zoom with us. Mahlon's like mind blown over here. But I have to start believing that I can do this thing, that I am worthy of this thing, that I can accomplish this thing. And that starts with changing that mindset from this isn't for me and I can never attain that, to manipulate my own mind to believe that I can.
Help me understand. I use that phrase all the time. And sometimes I know the answer, but I say, you know what? Help me understand how this works. And it gives the other person the opportunity to educate me. It gives them an opportunity to teach me something. And it puts it into a positive lens. So now they are helping me because I'm telling them in some way, I'm not understanding or seeing it the same way you do. Help me get there. And that person then it becomes less aggressive, and it almost makes me humble myself to go to them and say, even though I have some of the answers in my mind, I need to know what's in theirs. The phrase, help me understand, unlocks a lot of conversation. And again, that touches on servant leadership. I can see that touching on the whole Benjamin Franklin effect. And it is a form of manipulation. I can't even.
Well, and that's, I think that is literally probably going to be the key takeaway for me today, is that manipulation is not a negative word or even a negative action.
And that we do it all the time.
Unless you're a jackhole, then manipulation isn't cool, dude. But then
we haven't even got to the segment of who gets to decide what's positive and negative when using manipulation. Because if we're all using our own internal lenses, who's to say what's right and what's wrong? And
well, let's go there. As your like holy mother, what do you think? Who gets to decide if that's right or wrong?
I don't have a good answer to that, because as I'm struggling with this, I'm mad because I'm sure I've been in conversations where people have manipulated me, and I've never recognized it because I'm looking for negative. I'm looking for the negative manipulation. I can spot that. Don't try to butter me up and then ask me for a favor. That's driving me nuts, right? I can spot that manipulation. Well, what about all the times that somebody used that I didn't know? And what happens if the individual that I had that enemy to friend or enemy to ally situation, what if that was all a result of the manipulation, the successful manipulation that he was able to do to me and I was able to do to him?
Or that your leaders were able to do with both of you.
Or the lead. I can't tell you how our leader brought us together and said, I really need, you both are outstanding resources and you both are really great in your field. I need you to work together. This project is too big. It needs both of you to put your focus on it. I mean, after that meeting, I was like, we can do anything we set our minds to. Come on, let's go. That is a form of manipulation. And then
right.
Another thing that I'm thinking about right now is when you have authority and you use manipulation, how much more powerful is that? I mean, my boss told me things that I'm sure were a form of manipulation, but I took it even easier because of the authority that person had over me in my career.
Okay, so as you're sitting here mind blown, how do you feel about that though? Like, are you upset about it? Are you injured by it? Has it hurt you in some way, or are you grateful for it?
Ultimately, I'm grateful for some of it. I'm a little embarrassed because, again, I try to be as self-aware as I possibly can. And I try to constantly make sure as my behavior, am I doing things that I'm not even aware I'm doing? It makes me feel a little bit naive that I'm sitting here just now at my, middle aged and being in the IT field for 20 years, that this conversation, this moment in my life is when I'm finally starting to understand the different array of manipulation that goes on in every aspect of my life, and the effects that manipulation that other people have done on me, recognized and unrecognized, blows my mind. And the fact that there's so much of it that's probably happened to me that I never even recognized as being a form of manipulation. I'm not mad about it, but I feel stupid. I feel like the wool has been pulled over my eyes for so many years, and now it's finally coming off. And I'm like, holy moly, it's been here the entire time and I've never noticed it. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I would encourage you, I guess I would just encourage you not to feel like stupid, but rather like, because that's why I asked, like, are you injured by it? Is it, like, to find the strength in that? I have noticed, it took me a long time as well. But I can see, I've got someone in leadership over me who often super subtle about how they point those things out and how they encourage me to do things differently. And typically it's by example, right? So they'll explicitly point out, like, this is why I do this way. And I can step back and say, okay, she's sending me a message and I need to look at how I'm doing things. Also a form of manipulation. But what I love about the fact that I recognized that a long time ago is that I can now be more intentional about how I hear those messages from them and move forward in my work. You know what I mean? So for me, I think thinking about these things, I think I'm the one that gets to decide if it's negative or positive manipulation when I'm on the receiving end of it. And, I have to know that if I know and trust the other person enough to know that the intentionality was positive and that the intentionality was to be helpful, then it's my responsibility not to be hurt by that and to accept it for what it is and move forward. If I don't know the intentions of that other person, then I need to be cautious and pay more attention to that moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I'd agree with that. But where I'm feeling kind of stupid and the wool covered my eyes is, what about the times you've been manipulated and you never even knew it? Because that's what I'm wrestling with. I've seen manipulation. It's not that I didn't know it existed, but as I'm going through all these examples, what I would not have called or recognized as manipulation, because again, I was only looking for the negative. Now I'm starting to see situations, conversations, past events in an entirely different light. And that's where I'm like, there were so many times in my life that there was a form of manipulation being applied to me that I never recognized it until right now. That's where I'm at.
So you get to decide, were you injured by it? And is it something that you need to guard yourself against, or was it helpful?
Well, even if it's okay, so I'm the type of personality that I do not want to be manipulated by anybody. I do not want to be the one that's somebody has the puppet strings and I'm dancing, right? I don't want that to be in my life. And so where my increased energy, if you can hear me in my voice, is I want to do everything I can to recognize the times in which manipulation is being part of the conversation with me and anybody else, because I'm going to be completely transparent. I don't want to be manipulated in any way, and I don't know if I honestly don't know if you can prevent it. Now that I understand what manipulation is, and it can be positive and negative, I don't know if there will ever be. I don't know if I can sit here and say I will be able to recognize 100% of the time when I'm being manipulated by somebody else, and that drives me absolutely bonkers.
Well, and I think part of that, and just as a reflection, my friend, is that because of the bias that we have about that word, that negative bias. Because truthfully, I was going to say, truly, manipulation doesn't mean control. You still have choices and options. You still have your self-determination that you get to decide what you do with that. And if you're not putting yourself in situations where someone is taking advantage of you in that way, do you need to be on guard for that as much as you're feeling like, what?
So control, that's exactly where I was going to. I don't want to lose control. And if I don't recognize the manipulation, what that's doing for me internally is saying you never had control to begin with because you're being manipulated in the situation.
Well,
Good or bad? Good or bad?
If we're being super honest, there's very little we have control over anyway in the grand scheme of life, the universe, and everything.
That's true. That's true. But how much more now the pieces that I thought I had some control over, finding out that a good, even 40% of that is a form of manipulation, that I might not be making decisions on my own because somebody is helping manipulate me. And even in a positive way, that is big. That is, I mean,
think, don't you think though that the truth of the matter is that as human beings, we're pretty scrupulous anyway. You know what I mean? Like, we pay close attention to how people behave. And I don't know that I would be as open to being manipulated by someone who I don't trust, someone who I'm not open to that with. So I'm kind of wondering if that's not why we're pretty blind to it most of the time, because we have this openness that this person wants what's best for me, either in my career or my personal life or whatever, that's what makes it like harder for us to see, because there's some implicit trust there that wouldn't be there in a space where we were really paying attention and honed in on things like that.
That makes sense, but I still have that angst in me that says, and there's a couple examples in my mind now that I'm contemplating to say, was the decision I came to, was that because I was manipulated into that decision, or is that because that was a decision I came to on my own? And I can't answer that. I can't say truthfully it was a decision that I came to on my own. I am suspecting now that it is a form of manipulation to get me there. And now suddenly those decisions, that control I had on the choices that I were making, suddenly has evaporated for me. And again, it's not on everything, but the ones that I'm recognizing, I'm like, that is driving me absolutely nuts, because again, that was the decision I made. I was in control. I decided that. And in reality, I was manipulated into doing it and thinking that it was my idea. And did it benefit me? Absolutely. I mean, let's get that out of the way. It was not meant to hurt me in any way imaginable. But even in a positive way, I'm realizing, and I'm second guessing some of my choices to say, were those my own, or was that a byproduct of somebody using manipulation?
I'm just letting that hang there for a second, because I think that is the question that we have to ask. But at the same time, I think that question is so much more better. That's a lot of like big words to make sure you guys know I'm emphasizing this piece right here. But I think that that's so much more important when we're talking about someone that we don't trust. You know what I mean? I have a lot less worry about, especially if I know that in the end it came out in my favor, that it did benefit me in some way, or that it didn't harm me. That feels a lot different than those times that I look back on and think, yeah, I was really manipulated in a negative way, and that caused harm, and that person wasn't looking out for my best interest. And so, but those experiences are what teach us how to accept that air quoted manipulation in ways that do benefit us. You know what I mean? By having those different experiences, and we can accept the ones from people that we know are investing in us and are looking out for our best interest too, as opposed to the ones who are really trying to harm, cause harm and diminish us. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I disagree with that because I agree with everything you said. What I disagree with is I want to be in control, and I'm not, and I haven't been. And that's what's driving me absolutely nuts. I can't disagree with anything that you just said. I just sit here and I'm thinking, I wonder how many times, even I'll ask you, how many times do you think that you've been manipulated and never knew it? I'm uncovering situations now, going back 20 years, even in my career, and thinking that was a form of manipulation. That was a form of manipulation that I didn't recognize as manipulation before. So I'm literally going through time experiences, things that shaped me as a person, things that shaped me as in my career. And I never would have noticed, I never would have even considered it being a form of manipulation, but it was. And I don't know why it's such a big big epiphany for me, other than the fact that it takes a little bit of that control that I'm saying I made these decisions because I took in the information and I was the one that came to it, and that's a sign of growth for me, and that's a sign of experience. And to really realize that that was on the backbone of a form of manipulation, I was manipulated into going into that direction. And again, it was positive. It was positive. But to understand that some of those decisions that I made I only made them because there was a form of manipulation that even put me on the path to make that decision. Or in some cases, I made that decision because of that manipulation, but I assumed it was because of my decisions, the actions I chose. That's where I am just sitting here and spinning. And so the question that I hang in the air for you is, do you think you've been manipulated and never knew it? And does that bother you if you think you have?
No. I think that stars fall every single day, and I don't know that it happens. And if I don't know that it happens, does it really affect me? You know what I mean? I think that what's best for me and what I need is to look back over my life and know that was it manipulation? It very well could have been. But if I take ownership for my own self-determination and have decided, I made those choices and I got the consequences, positive or negative, from them, I can't be mad about that. Whether it was manipulated or not, because what it did is it means that I have to pay more attention. If I was manipulated in a negative way to do something that I shouldn't have done, I learned a lesson from that too. And so it makes me more wise for next time. So no, I can't be mad about that. I just pay attention. I just have to pay more attention. You know what I mean?
Yep, I guess. So
what I'm learning today, folks, is that Mahlon might be a control freak, maybe?
Well, I think I'm trying to be honest with myself to say there is a lot more manipulation that happened to me that I haven't recognized, and that's shocking to me. That is absolutely shocking to me. And when decisions that I have made where I thought was of my own accord and clean hands, I'll say, like I made them because that was what I felt was good, to understand that there was a thread of manipulation to even get me to that point irritates me, because it takes away, and this is something that I think, as live on air, everyone, I'm learning about myself and I need to overcome and fix, is those were decisions I made and they were good outcomes, and that was a pat on the back for myself that I'm finding out now. There was other people, other hands guiding me that lessens the decision that I made for myself. And that's a humble pie that I am having to cut a big piece of right now and have to choke down, to be honest. So as I, continue to bare my soul on the podcast, I do want to go back to one thing, which is when the enemy becomes a friend. And I want to ask you, what are some strengths that you learned from going through that? Because I have some from me, but I kind of want to hear from you first. Is what are some of those lessons that you took away from that and you maybe keep applying in your life today that really have helped you along the way?
I'm glad you asked that, because I think that's probably what I've spent the most time in thinking about, just as we're prepping for this topic. Like, what made the difference, or what were the lessons learned? And I think for me, I hate that I keep having to learn this lesson over and over again, but I think for me, there's this idea that there are people that are in our life for a time and for a purpose, right? That either they needed me, I needed them, but there was some purpose that happened. And sometimes those people come and they go. And sometimes those people come and they stay for a long time. And maybe even forever. But to be okay with that, and to know that if something comes to an end like that, that the purpose was served. And I don't have to be upset about that. I don't have to be sad about that, but to know that, if they needed me, I hope I gave them what they needed. And if I needed them, I'm grateful for what that brought to my life, and to be okay with that. I also, the power of perspective and communication is also kind of the thing that's been ruminating with me too, is, her and I looked at things, the same situation, in a very different way. And, we did the same thing in the beginning. You know what I mean? And then when we drifted apart for a couple of years, it was the same thing. It was the same situation. We both looked at it in a different way. And if we could have communicated about that sooner, if we could have come together and said, no, I hear you and I understand, and this is what I'm going to do to honor you in this difficult space, I feel like that could have made things better. But I am grateful. I mean, it's not what it was when we were together every single day. I mean, I spent more time with this woman than I spent with my family most days. You know what I mean? So, and it's not the same as that. But I am super grateful that all of those experiences are there, and we get to build on them in a different way, and support each other in our work in a different way than we did before anyway. So that's kind of I guess those are kind of lessons learned for me. What about you?
I learned a lot having to work with this person who I would, if I had to pick somebody, I would not have ever picked this person. And so I think I learned a lot. I think one of the main things that I learned though was always leave myself open to learn something from somebody. I thought that my approach was more efficient, was get more information, was the best way to do it. And what I've learned from myself, and in this situation specifically, is I can always learn from somebody. There's always something that I can take away with a collaboration, a partnership with someone, and walk into that situation with an open mind to say, I wonder what I'm going to learn from today, rather than there is nothing that this person can teach me. I am going to have to drag them along. So that kind of a perspective and mind shift that I had, and I use that today. I go into collaborations with new people, with people I've worked with, and every time I do it, I'm like, okay, I wonder what I'm going to learn from them today. And I try to make it feel exciting for myself, because I do believe in it, and I do believe that there's always going to be something someone can teach you. That was rooted in situation that my enemy became an ally. Another thing that I kind of learned through that was there is more than one way to do something. And I also learned that just because it's different than my ideas or my approach doesn't make it wrong, just makes it different. And I had to come to that conclusion when I saw how effective this person was in their role and how efficient they were able to get things done. I couldn't just sit there and say any longer, well, I have the better approach. I have the upper hand here. The proof was in the pudding. And so I had to really kind of come to terms with that, to say there's more than one way to skin a cat. I have to learn to appreciate that. Even though it looks different than mine, even though sometimes I don't understand it, instead of just writing it off, I need to make sure I ask better questions. I need to make sure that I am going to that person and engaging them to say, this is different than what I would do. I find that interesting. Help me understand. Again, form of manipulation, but it's also it's manipulating someone for me to learn, so I can understand, see the world in a different lens, see a problem a different way, and maybe come with a different tool than leave with a different tool than I did when I arrived. And all of that is, a huge benefit for me. And I would say those were probably one of, the two. I could go on. There was a lot of self-reflection in that time, things that I've kind of walked away and learned. But I would think those are probably the two biggest ones. And I'm very thankful for this individual. And at the beginning, I was not in a space where I could say, this is going to be amazing. This is going to be difficult, but I'm going to come away with it with such great learnings and insights and new abilities and talents. And that's exactly what happened. And it almost made me think, I wish I would have walked in with an open mind, but it took this struggle for me to understand that. And I think without it, I would not have grown in that way. So in some weird way, I had to go through the struggle. I had to go through this conflict with this individual and then come out the other side in order to really appreciate it. And I avoid that now when I have other individuals that I'm like, I don't know if we're going to, they do it differently. It's not the same as me. Are they as effective? Oh, I got to work with this person. I try to come into it as like I said earlier, I wonder what I'm going to learn today from them. And that's always been when I started doing that, that's always put a positive spin on it, and it makes that pill go down a little bit easier than, I got to work with so and so. This is such, a perspective, positive perspective does a lot in that situation. So I think those are the two things that I learned the most.
And positive perspective is a form of self-manipulation as well. Like teaching yourself. And
the circle continues, everybody.
It's all about manipulation.
So how interesting that food for thought segment fits in. I mean, it's interwoven. I'm seriously sitting here just baffled.
Well, and I guess for me, like, it really challenges me to consider my biases about a word like manipulation. You know what I mean? And even other things that have that automatic negative connotation, and I know that's not what the word was intended for. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's some good takeaway for me to work on this week, because I don't have enough to self-reflect on and grow with myself. I need you to bring things like your mowing experience to my life, Mahlon. So thank you for that.
You make fun of when this inspiration comes, but I tell you, it's like, have I never really sat and thought about manipulation? I mean, I've heard the word before, and I was always in the camp of, well, yeah, people that use manipulation, they're just horrible people. I am literally dripping in manipulation. When
my kids were younger, I used to set one of them on one side of me and the other one at the other side of me at the movie theater, because I was manipulating their behavior to have a positive outcome. So no, it's like constant. I just think it's not as bad maybe as we think. So thanks for the conversation today. This was really, this was kind of fun I really do wish sometimes you guys could see the Zoom meeting, because your facial expressions as some of these things hit you were pretty priceless today. So it's definitely added bonus for me as your friend that I get to see that.
Well, and I want to be, again, as transparent as possible, because I think this types of conversation warrants it. And literally, I am just standing beside myself, and just my mind is literally blown. So I know for the rest of this week, I'm going to constantly be asking myself if this is a form of manipulation and seeing where I can identify it in my everyday conversations. Because I know it's going to be there. I just want to know if I'm going to start recognizing some of that now that I'm paying attention. I wonder if I'm going to recognize that more, or if it's going to be about the same, because I am almost sure that there is manipulation happening to me that I'm not even aware of. And I've already said it, but it's driving me nuts. So I wonder if I'll get a chance to see some of that this week.
I'm going to call that mission accomplished here on Roundtable Mindset this week. So we have established and set the bar and have met it today. So I'm glad that brought something to you today, Mahlon, other than your mowing experience.
I know you make fun of me, but it works. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a great week. Oh, it's going to be the 4th of July holiday. I know it'll be past by the time this gets released, but have a happy and safe 4th.
We hope you had a happy and safe 4th, and we'll see you all next time here on Roundtable Mindset.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999, or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.